Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Liam's First Look. We haven't gotten to the first look in the last couple weeks. It's been very busy from college wrestling to Easter Sunday. We've had a lot going on, but now we're right back at it. We've got a UFC card going down with Brendan All In Allen rematching Chris Curtis in the main event of the evening. It's going to be a middleweight matchup. And this is a time where, it's a rare rematch where the circumstances are similar. Last time Chris Curtis stepped up on short notice and he was able to take out Brendan Allen, I had the fight by knockout as well as Brendan Allen by knockout in that fight. So, now we're back at it. We've got another run of this matchup. I profited the last time these two guys fought. Let's see if we can figure it out once again. If you guys are new here, welcome aboard. Want to welcome everybody and just say right off the rip, this is not my most educated takes of the week. I'm going to come back to you guys later on in the week. Rich is back once again for Bets and Banter. That's going to be on Thursday. I have a link up for you guys tonight before I go to sleep. But what we do have today is my first look at the card. We're going to talk about some trends. We're going to talk about some things that we notice. We're going to talk about some fighter tape, things like that we have already in our bag of resources. But we always try and sharpen up our reads over the course of the week, leave no stone unturned. We look at the market, we look at the data, we look at everything that we could possibly get our hands on and try and give ourselves an edge to win in a competitive market. So for me, I'm excited to start like we always do with the main event of the evening. And like I said, guys, this is a rematch between two quality fighters in this middleweight division. You've got the 5-2-1 no contest, Chris Curtis. I'm talking about their UFC records taking on the 11-2 Brendan All In Allen. And obviously, when you're looking at Brendan Allen in this spot, you know that Brendan Allen has been on the rise, right? He's had a lot of momentum built up. This is a sport about timing. And right now, Brendan Allen looks to be, coming into his own a little bit, right? You talk about the fact that the UFC finally bends. They're giving him the purple shorts, right? They're kind of giving in a little bit to that gimmick. When you look at the other people that are supporting him in his corner, the people from Louisiana that talk about his toughness, his work ethic. He's been around for a long time, had a lot of professional fights, had a ton of fights at the UFC level at this point, still a young man in the game. And now he's had a little bit more time between that fight with Chris Curtis and this one. However, some of the things about the style matchup are still quite difficult for Brendan Allen because we've seen it hasn't been like he's gone through these fights without any adversity. The Paul Craig fight, I thought was a beautiful showing of his jiu-jitsu, his skill on the mat. He was able to dominate that fight largely. But when you look at that fight with Bruno Silva that he had most recently, there was a lot of competitive exchanges in that fight. And Brendan Allen showed his composure. He showed his ability to deal with some adversity. He got clipped though. And when you look at that fight, it's a little bit emblematic of Brendan Allen's career. He's always been skilled. He's always been talented, but you can crack him a little bit on the chin and put him in some danger. So I think that for Brendan Allen, he's got a lot of tools that he could use to win fights. If you look at what those tools are, he's been showcasing his jiu-jitsu in his recent matchups, going out there securing a lot of rear naked chokes, but oftentimes he's setting it up with the hands. He's setting it up with the kicks. He does have some power in his shots. He's a big guy, tall. He's got some leverage on his shots. But when you look at the other side in Chris Curtis, he tends to have better defense overall, I would say, than Brendan Allen. When you look at Brendan, sometimes he's a little bit open to being hit because he's so aggressive and offensive and looking for his own shots. And I think that when you look at the Sean Strickland fight, that was at a catch weight up at 195 pounds. I believe that one was on short notice as well. I'd have to double check that. But in any case, Sean Strickland was able to go out there and, TKO him in the second round. It's very rare to see a guy like Sean Strickland finishing fights. He's just not that much of a fight finisher, historically speaking. He tends to go out there and win these decisions at the UFC level. Even some fights like the Uriah Hall fight, where you think, this is a matchup where he could go out there and get the finish. He kind of drags people along, to the decision, right? That's just kind of the way he fights. Even the Izzy fight rocks him early and then, fights it out for the whole 5 rounds. So I think that when we're looking at, oh, wow. Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate that compliment. He said, yo, Liam, you had the sickest read on the Loughran fight when you said the odds are off. The order is decision sub KO. I was thinking of that as I hammered the finish prop like a sheep idiot. I'm sorry to hear that you hammered the finish prop. I did, lose a little bit on that fight ends by sub, as well as the Loughran by sub in that spot. But I do think that that was a good read overall. I should have had the sub or decision. I said that on X right after the fight. That was a regret for me. But that's what I'm always trying to do, is give you independent analysis, right? I'm not just going to go with the read of the vast public. But I will say, Angel Pacheco has a chin from Hades and just a strong will to win, because he was getting beat up for portions of that fight, and he just kept staying in the fray. So wanted to give him that credit and that shout out, but maybe a little bit of skill refinement needed to compete at this UFC level. But when we're looking at the recent performances, there's definitely been a string of unfortunate results for Chris Curtis, right? He has the split decision win over MAB. That keeps his undefeated run as a favorite, I believe, intact in the UFC. But he also had the no contest with Nasruddin Imavov, a fight that looked like it was trending in the wrong direction. And additionally, the Kelvin Gastelum fight, he loses a unanimous decision there. Looked like the fight was going Chris's way, as far as I remember. I'm going to go back and revisit the tape this week. But my memory of that fight is that Chris was doing well and winning the fight. Then they clashed heads and he kind of dropped off a little bit in terms of, his level of aggression over time. And I think that he was a little bit concussed, to tell you the truth. They clashed heads real bad. I think he was kind of just trying to hold on and get to the end of that fight. But, he kind of sent Joaquin Buckley, who looked great this weekend, got the nice win over Vicente Luque, who I'd like to see retire. As a huge fan of his, I just think that, he's kind of coming to the end of his road. So that's something that I want to see. But when I'm looking at a guy like Brendan Allen in this spot, a guy like Chris Curtis in this spot, both these guys have a lot to win and lose here. For Chris Curtis, he's an older guy in this division. If he does not get this win over Brendan Allen, he could kind of kiss goodbye his chances of fighting for a title, of getting, a big ranked contendership fight, of getting to these big main event type spots. I think that this is kind of a make or break fight for a guy like Chris Curtis in some ways. And when you're looking at the Brendan Allen side, he's had a couple steps up in competition, and those are the times he's typically, fallen off a little bit, because the Chris Curtis fight was on short notice and he lost that fight. And Chris is a guy who's very seasoned, a veteran of the fight game, ton of professional fights. And then Sean Strickland. So when you look at these extreme couture fighters, they've had, an answer. Both of them went out there and got performance of the night finishes against Brendan Allen in the past. So I think that this is a huge, differentiator for Brendan Allen. When this fight was announced, it was supposed to be Brendan Allen against Marvin Vettori. And I could just disclose to you guys now, I felt like that was a fight I would have favored Brendan Allen to win. Why? Just because I think he's a little bit more dangerous in all phases, right? I think Marvin is a great jack of all trades. I think he's a little bit of a master of none. If you said go out there and outstrike the best strikers, I don't think Marvin could do that. If you say go out there and outgrapple the best grapplers, I don't think Marvin could do that. So he's got a lot of heart and a lot of will to win and some durability, but that's a lot of what he's been relying on as well in his career, because I'm not seeing him be very dangerous in some of those positions. So I felt like Brendan Allen was going to be dangerous for Marvin. I felt like he could put him in danger potentially with the grappling. I thought that we could see, some big shots, body shots, kicks landed by Brendan Allen in that matchup. Can he replicate the same things against Curtis? I just struggle to see that being as clean and easy in this matchup, because Chris Curtis is pretty defensively sound. I think the way that Brendan Allen needs to target him is with his kicks. I think he's got to try and take, a heavy long distance approach here, because in the boxing phase, Chris Curtis is not only comfortable, he's very dangerous on the counter. I posted a couple of his knockouts today, and people want to discredit some of his opponents. Buckley's gone down a weight class, for example. Phil Hawes doesn't have the greatest chin you've ever seen, for example. But I think that when you talk about how Chris Curtis, lulls people to sleep with a little bit of this, tit for tat kind of pacing, and then he just explodes on them with a big shot. I think that is a good way for him to look to take this fight. Brendan Allen is going to throw more volume in all likelihood. So if this fight goes to the cards, I think that's going to be dicey for Chris Curtis. But I think that Chris Curtis has an ability to change the complexion of this fight with big strikes at any point. And we've seen Brendan Allen be susceptible to that in the past. What we haven't seen a lot of is Chris Curtis getting out-grappled, out-wrestled in the UFC. He's done a very good job defending takedowns. And I think that Brendan Allen has typically been taking guys down after he hurts them. If you look at that fight, with Bruno Silva, he shot a couple of takedowns that had no hope or prayer. And I had mentioned in my breakdown of the Weidman fight that I thought the first layer takedown defense from Bruno Silva is fine. He's normally very good at sprawling back, pushing at the hips. He does a few things right. It's just in extended wrestling exchanges, you can expose him for, his lack of fundamental techniques. And I think that for a guy like Chris Curtis, his whole career has been like trying to keep people from taking him down so that way he could try and knock him out on the feet and land his shots on the feet. That's kind of just the way he approaches fighting. And so I feel like he is quite difficult to take down. I feel like the limb length of Brendan Allen would be critical for him if the fight is on the mat. But I just think Chris is pretty defensively responsible in ground exchanges. So I think he would probably just play it very safe if he was on the ground at all with Brendan Allen, which is hard to do. Brendan's a good passer. He's got good skills in all positions. He can bust people up with those elbows. He does a lot well, but I just think that it's kind of difficult for me to ask a guy like Brendan Allen to cover this price tag here, given the knowns, so that's the way I felt looking at this matchup. This is my first look at the card. So there you have it. First look at the card. I think it's probably a dogger pass situation in this main event from a gut level feeling. But I'm going to do the tape and the due diligence and see what I see. The things that I noted that make me hesitate to play the Curtis side. Number one, he's not on the greatest streak of momentum. He did bounce back, get a win over Marc-Andre Barriault, but that's a lower level in the middleweight division with all due respect. And now he's stepping up, certainly in class, to fight Brendan Allen. He has proof of concept, right? He knows he can go out there and beat him, but it's also a different thing when it's a main event. It's over 5 rounds. And, the media is going to be a little bit more. But honestly, I feel like the UFC is kind of downplaying this card and just throwing something out there because they've got WrestleMania going on, the TKO properties. I think they're trying to focus a little more of the attention of the masses on that event. And so this event is an afterthought. You look at this co-main event that we're going to discuss next. It's not a very quality fight. And I don't mean for the fighting substance of it. I'm sure it'll be a fine fight. But what I mean is, like, normally you see big stars in main and co-main events, and that is not the case in this fight card. So it's just something interesting to note there. But what we do have is a fun, action-packed, scrappy main event here. And I do think it's more than likely going to end inside the distance. Chris Curtis, like I said, very durable guy, has not been finished very often throughout his career, just 2 finished losses in a very lengthy career. I think that Brendan Allen could point fight his way to a decision, but I just think more often than not, Chris Curtis is going to force a fight here, and he's going to find out, whether he can knock this guy out again, whether he can put hands on him and hurt him and, put him in danger and duress, or whether Brendan Allen has solved some of the problems that he had in the past and he can be a little bit more effective. I know that he beat Punahele Soriano, who I believe is out of the same gym, Extreme Couture. So, he did a better job in that fight, managing distance, putting big body kicks on him, but we've also seen Punahele struggle in other fights at this high level. So I think that Chris Curtis has had a much better showing, 5-2. Like I said, with the 1-no contest against another top guy in Imavov. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this one plays out. But right now I'm leaning towards the guy who already got it done, one time in Chris Curtis. Next up, guys, speaking of the co-main event that's not between 2 big stars, we got Alexander Hernandez, 14-7 overall as a professional, taking on Damon Jackson, who is 22-6-1 as a professional. Let's look at their UFC records as well, give ourselves some full context. Damon is 5-4-1 with 1-no contest in his UFC tenure, and Alexander, the Great Ape, I believe it is. Yeah, the Great Ape. He changed his nickname. He is rocking a 6-6 record with the promotion. So these guys are basically 500 UFC fighters, but they've had some peaks and valleys. When you look at Alexander Hernandez, let's talk about the good, because it's hard to ignore a guy who's got wins on his resume over Beneil Dariush, OAM, Olivier Aubin-Mercier, Francisco Trinaldo, and that's just hard to ignore right there. But you look at the dates on those, right? The last really quality win he had is 2019 over Francisco Trinaldo. And that was a very contested decision at the time that that fight took place against Donald Cerrone. He talked a gang of mess and then got finished pretty brutally. Also, that was in 2019. And then you look at the 2018 result against OAM, the 2018 result against Beneil Dariush. Had a hell of a year, but he has not seen those same performances since. He lost to Drew Dober, got finished in the second round. He was able to defeat Chris Grutzmacher, but that's a win that doesn't age all that well. Thiago Moises, he loses that fight via unanimous decision. I bet Moises plus 199 in that fight. I was very happy about the result there. I put 1.5 units. I felt confident that Moises was going to go out there and be able to outstrike him. And I think that took a lot of people by surprise. It did not take me by surprise because I felt like Thiago Moises had more quality experience and he was more committed to throwing his 1-2, to using his kicks. And I felt like if it went to the grappling portion, I would have favored him in that portion as well. So when I'm looking at this matchup, Mike Breeden, that's a win that's all right. I forgot to mention Jim Miller as a quality win. That's obviously a very quality win, and that's his only recent win that is very quality. That was in 2023. But again, that's a little bit of an older version of Jim Miller. So with all due respect to the legend who's back at UFC 300, you look at these other losses. Hanato Moicano finishes him in round 2. Billy Quarantillo, who was just put on hard times by my boy Yusuf Salal, was also finished in round 2. So I think there's a lot to worry about. Bill Algeo was able to survive, some sketchy exchanges with Alexander Hernandez. Unfortunately, he was not able to survive those sketchy exchanges with Kyle Nelson over the weekend. However you feel about the stoppage, you can refer to my account over on X if you want to see exactly how I felt about that one. I posted some examples of different stoppages where maybe the standards were a little bit different. And I didn't even have money on the Bill Algeo side. I would just like to see a little bit more consistency in how these fights are officiated, because it's very hard as bettors to know what to expect, in these fights. But in any case, we've got Damon Jackson on the other side here. And Damon Jackson, like I said, not the most pristine record you've ever seen in the UFC. He has done a good job of avoiding finishes lately in terms of getting finished, except for that Dan Ige fight. Brutal knockout with Dan Ige. But he went out there against Billy Quarantillo, put it on the line for 15 minutes. And, he wasn't able to get his hand raised there. Tough result. But he was able to finish Pat Sabatini. Really surprised everybody with that first round punt to the face. Well done there. Got a win over Dan Argueta, a guy who was fighting up a weight class in that fight. And then he got the win over Kamwela Kirk, finished him via arm triangle choke in the second round. Got a win over Charles Rosa, who could not buy a win in the UFC in this latter portion of his run, unfortunately. And then he lost to Ilya Taporia. What do you even say about that? The current champion lost to Movlid Kabulaev via jumping knee KO in the first round. So we've seen a bunch of times Damon Jackson get knocked out by very quality fighters. Dan Ige, quality ranked featherweight, has been a long time. Ilya Taporia, current champion of the division. Movlid Kabulaev was undefeated at the time. The Kevin Aguilar loss doesn't age great, but at the time, Kevin Aguilar was a problem. Kevin Aguilar was on a wave of momentum, I feel. And then he lost to Yancy Medeiros all the way back in 2014. You won't even hold that against him. So guy like Damon Jackson, he's had some high highs and he's had some low lows. The Mirsad Bektic win, he was kind of getting beat up in that fight. And then he was able to rally, find the late turnaround and get the win there. But we've definitely seen Damon Jackson starting to slow down a little bit at this portion of his career. He is 35 years of age in this spot. He's taking on an Alexander Hernandez, who's not a spring chicken, but he is 31 years of age here. Going to be the younger guy. He's also going to have a reach advantage despite being a few inches shorter. So I feel like Alexander Hernandez has more power when this fight is standing. But I do think that, Damon Jackson, he's got a good style for tiring people out. So it's a little bit of a battle of wills, but I think Alexander Hernandez a little bit underrated in his grappling. He has done a good job grappling in the past, especially. He is a guy that tends to slow down, but I think this move to 145 pounds may force him to up the cardio just a little bit over time. So it's interesting to me because I just think a lot of times Damon Jackson could get sparked in the early going here. I don't know if Alex has the confidence to let it go with his hands as much as he needs to, but I think that the athleticism gap is going to be pretty substantial in the early going. So it's a difficult fight to call. It's weird that this is a UFC co-main event, especially in this day and age, but both guys could really use a win. Maybe they're going to fight desperate. And give me Alexander Hernandez here. I think he's probably a little bit more dangerous, but it's not a fight I feel great about. And it's certainly a fight I'm going to have to tape before I feel confident laying money on either side. Okay. Got an ice cube. Excuse me. We got an iced coffee today, folks. And I got an ice cube right in my face. So apologies there. But we can move along to this next fight. And it's going to be the featured bout. And this seems like the talk of the town in the sharpest chat in the game. Appreciate everybody in the YouTube chat that's talking right now. A lot of people have been talking about this fight right here. And you've got Morgan Chartier, who is another French fighter. And he is coming in this fight on a 4-fight win streak. He was 6-3, in the Cage Warriors promotion as well. So interesting spot here. He lost to Paul Hughes, who's a very highly touted fighter via majority decision. Lost to Jordan Vucenic, who's another highly touted fighter via split decision. Lost to Soren Bach, who's a quality fighter. So it does seem like he's losing mostly to quality opponents when he has lost in the past. He has a lot of losses for a guy with so many followers on social media. Something I noted as well, he's not been in the UFC very long, but he's certainly a popular guy. And you look at his opponent here, Chepe Mariscal has been, one of these fighters who's just been derailing hype trains, right? Whether it's, Christian Rodriguez in the bantamweight division or Chepe Mariscal in the featherweight and lightweight divisions. He's a guy who's able to go out there and put on a bunch of different, looks in his fights. If we pull up the record for Chartier, he tends to be a knockout artist. He's lost all of his losses by decision except for one. He lost via submission one time, and that was seemingly back earlier on in his career. I'm not seeing it in his recent run on Tapology. So I think that Morgan Chartier, wants to keep this fight on the feet. That's probably his bread and butter. But you look at the Chepe Mariscal side, he has lost only to quality opponents. You look Gregor Gillespie, Bryce Mitchell, Frank Buenafuente. I'm not as familiar with his game. Joe Anderson Brito, another quality UFC guy. Sean Soriano. That's a little bit puzzling, if I'm telling you the truth, because Sean Soriano has struggled in the UFC, especially. That's a little bit of a concerning loss for Chepe. Steve Garcia was able to put him out via knockout as well, with knees and elbows in the LFA. So the quality of competition is definitely a lot higher on the Jose Chepe Mariscal side. But the level of competition that he's faced within the UFC, I don't think has been supremely high. He fought Jack Jenkins, and I think that was a fight that just didn't get to materialize all that long. It was a good fight while it lasted. I thought Chepe was getting the better of the fight. I thought he was clearly going to win it as well. But, a fight where, he took on Trevor Peek up a weight class. That was a one. I believe that was up a weight class, wasn't it? I'm just pulling it up to see the results here. And of course, it does not say it on Tapology. There it is, lightweight, 155. Yeah, so he comes in on short notice, gets the win over Trevor Peek. I mean, that was a huge difference in how long they've been fighting. In the level of experience, the green nature of Trevor Peek kind of got exposed in that fight. And I think that for Chepe, he took advantage of that. He also fought a pretty green fighter in Jack Jenkins, all things considered. He only had 14 professional fights. And you could say whatever you want about the level of competition in Cage Warriors, but you've got the younger guy here in Morgan Chartier. He's 28 years of age, and he has had a ton of professional fights. And it does seem like everybody's expecting Chepe to continue his run. But I would say my only word of caution on the Chepe side is just he has been finished via knockout a few times in the first round. You haven't seen that from Morgan Chartier. He has one submission loss way back in the day. Otherwise, he's been quite durable, and he's gone to decision. So maybe he gets exposed at the UFC level. I think that's very possible. But I also think that this guy has more followers on social media than all the other fighters above him on this main card combined. So this is a guy that's definitely built a following, right? He's definitely somebody that the UFC would love to be able to market if he is any good at fighting. And so I don't like betting into those kind of narrative spots. I do think that you could see a guy in Chepe Mariscal come out here and fight well. But my guy Dixon before the show was talking about the OnlyFans fade. This is another person that is going to have the OnlyFans mark of disapproval, Chepe Mariscal. So I'm half playing here, but I just feel like Chepe is a guy that's very good, but you might be buying into him at the highest point in his stock right now. I feel like a lot of people have been cashing in on him lately, and it looks like this line is about to potentially flip, right? He opened a plus 125 underdog, according to Bet Online, and it looks like this line is now sitting at Chepe Mariscal even money. So it's possible that this line could flip in this spot, and I'll be interested to see how this line moves throughout the week. I don't remember much of what I've seen from Morgan Chartier, except to say that the Manolo Zucchini fight doesn't really convince me of much. I'm not sure that Manolo Zucchini will get another UFC fight. I think that sums up my thoughts on that. It seemed like a pretty blatant setup. And now it seems like we've got a guy who the UFC would like to do well in a matchup where, Chepe is the more seasoned, U.S. fighter, but he doesn't have more professional fights. He is a little bit of an older guy. And he's the only one that's been knocked out between these two guys. And you look at Morgan Chartier, he's got 11 wins by knockout. I can kind of understand why, the odds makers thought, hey, maybe Chartier is a little bit more youthful, a little bit quicker, and he could get to the target. So I'm interested to see how this one plays out. This is another one. I'm going to have to go to school on the tape for this fight. If you've been system betting Chepe, I do not blame you at all for just continuing to let it ride, especially if you're getting an underdog price once again. But for me, this is a fight where I would not be laying chalk on either side personally. And I'm telling you, Chepe has beaten good fighters, no doubt about it. That's what I'm acknowledging here. But most of the losses have been to very quality fighters for Morgan Chartier, and he is a little bit younger. And fighting is a game of what do you have for me right now? And right now, I think that the stock is a little bit high on Chepe Mariscal just overall, and maybe that's right. Maybe we just were undervaluing him. He's got wins over Pat Sabatini, Yusuf Zalal, but could he beat Yusuf Zalal today? I don't know, because Yusuf Zalal was a very young man when he fought Chepe, right? We'll bring that back up. He was 22 years of age, right? Are you the same you were at 22? Right? I'm not. And I'm only, a couple years older than that. So it's like when you think about how people change and grow over time, I think that would be an interesting fight to see again, right? I don't think that it's guaranteed to go the same way. I'll leave it at that. Next up on this card, guys, what do we got? My word. Tapology has been a son of a gun to navigate today. We've got Ignacio Bahamondes taking on Christos Yagos. And this is an interesting fight on paper because Ignacio Bahamondes looks like he has all the skills and the build and a lot of things that you would want from a UFC fighter. But he goes out there and he loses a unanimous decision last time out to Ludovic Klein. He lost a split decision to John McDessie. He was able to beat Trey Ogden, who's been on a little bit of a run lately in the UFC, but he's getting his finishes when guys are tending to gas out a little bit in the third round. He's been taking a lot of damage in his fights. On the Yagos side, he tends to have 5 really good minutes, depending on the fight, right? I think against Thiago Moises, he went out there with the complete wrong game plan. I thought he should have been a lot more aggressive in that spot, and instead he ends up trying to play it cool, gets his back taken, fights over shortly thereafter, just a level gap in the grappling. And Yagos tends to like to have a grappling advantage. Against Ricky Glenn, I kind of thought Ricky Glenn would get that one done. And of course, he gets starched easily in the first round. Then you see the Daniel Zellhuber fight, and it looked like Yagos was having some success early, but unfortunately, down the stretch, you see he starts to fatigue a little bit and he gets submitted. And that's been the story of his career. As he fatigues in these fights, as those muscles fill up, he starts to wilt a little bit under pressure. And that's something that's hard to deal with, right? He's 6-7 in the promotion. In his recent run of fights, he has been 2-3, and his wins are over Ricky Glenn and Sean Soriano. So really not an inspiring strength of competition here. Carlton Minus, his other win in his last few. He really hasn't beaten a quality opponent in the UFC besides for Ricky Glenn. And at this stage of his career, Ricky Glenn is a little bit more fragile than he used to be. So I don't know that the win is as quality as otherwise considered. Looking at the other side here, Roosevelt Roberts is a guy that's fallen on hard times, but he's typically gotten submitted in his losses. He's not been a guy that's been easy to knock out, and he was knocked out in a bad way by Ignacio Bahamondes. That's a highlight reel that will stay with us for quite some time. Rongzhu was a guy that I believe the UFC should, kind of let go back to the regional scene at 24 years of age, get some more experience outside the UFC. And that's exactly what happened, right? He was let go after that fight, went to UAE Warriors, went to the road to UFC, and now he's back and looks a lot better and a lot more aggressive. So I think that that's something that was a good quality win. Now a guy who's back to the UFC. So I think that you look at the strength of schedule for Ignacio Bahamondes and losing to John McDessie and Ludovic Klein. Is it the greatest look of all time? No. Is it something that I think warrants being a minus 320 favorite in this fight? Maybe not. But I just think Ignacio Bahamondes has more quality wins. He's probably a little bit better overall as a fighter here. And I think he's got the tools to get this job done. Valley Flow Striking Academy, has put out some good fighters over time. The takedown defense isn't always there, but I think Yagos is a guy that gets too tired. He could be broken in his fights, and unless he lands big shots here or gets an early submission, I think Ignacio Bahamondes is going to have too much for him over the course of the fight. So that's how I feel about that one, guys. And I'll make sure that I do my due diligence as I do with all these matchups, but for me, the lean is Ignacio Bahamondes. I respect people taking the big dog shot because I think the price is probably a little bit too aggressive, but I like to bet on fighters that I could see the realistic path for victory. And I just don't know that I see that for Yagos pre-tape. So I'll have to look into it and see if I find, a way to victory for him. Then we've got Walter Walker next up in the UFC. Guy opened up a minus 400 favorite on Bet Online. He's now down to about a minus 360 favorite. And I'm a little bit surprised to see this big of a favorite price tag. Obviously, Lucas Bresky is on a 3-fight losing skid, but all those fights took place in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. So he's 0-3 in the promotion, had a no contest because of a pop drug test, I believe, with Dylan Potter. But I do think that, Bresky was able to get the win on that night. I believe I bet on him as well on the Contender Series. I thought that was a very easy matchup for him against Dylan Potter, or at least a very winnable matchup, I should say. And when I'm looking at the losses he's had in the UFC, Martin Budai, I know Budai's stock is a little bit down after getting finished by Shamil Gaziev. However, he was 4-1 in the promotion overall. So then you look at Carl Williams. He loses a competitive fight to Carl Williams where he made him work for the entire 15 minutes. Carl Williams, 3-0 in the UFC, just won in a co-main event. Loses to Waldo Cortez Acosta. That's his only loss via finish. And Waldo is a guy that has, real experience at the boxing level. So I think that you look at Waldo, he's a very athletic guy, and he was able to go out there and get the blitz on him. Now I feel like this is a do or die spot, right? Like Bresky is fighting for his job here. He's probably well aware of that. And Walter Walker, he's 11-0, but he's fighting out of Gore MMA. Not a ton of high-level professionals out of that gym. And the ones that you have seen are Bogdan Guskov and a couple of these guys. So I definitely think, there's some quality guys training at the gym, but Walter Walker looks to be a little bit slow to me. If I had to make a critique, I think he looks dangerous. He does go out there and get a lot of finishes. He's got 6 wins by knockout, 1 win by submission, but he's not the most dangerous guy you've ever seen. Gone to decision as well. Has not been fighting the most experienced opponents in his fights. And last time out gets to win in Titan FC in a title fight over Alex Nicholson. So hats off to him there. Alex Nicholson is a fine fighter. But Alex Nicholson was 1-3 at the UFC level. He was not the highest level guy you've ever seen. And I think that Lucas Bresky, in most of his fights has shown, a decent ability to go out there and try and keep the fight pushing for 15 minutes. And when you're talking about a guy in Walker who's been to decision a bunch of times, and you're talking about a guy in Bresky who's been to decision a bunch of times, win and lose. I think he's 1-2 in decision. I don't know. It just strikes me as a fight that could be a little bit longer than people expect, a little bit awkward. And if Walter Walker doesn't go out there and finish early, it could just end up being a strange, disgusting, rolling heavyweight fight against the fence. And I think at plus 300, Bresky will probably look a little wide if that's the case. But it's another fight where I'll do due diligence and look into these guys a little bit more. Obviously, Walter Walker is the younger guy. He's going to have some intangibles here, like height and reach, favoring him. But I also think Bresky has the UFC experience on his side, and that could pay some dividends here. He's been fighting, guys at the UFC level, and I think that could matter. So, yeah, for a weird heavyweight fight situated number 9 on the card, I think obviously the UFC would like to see Walter Walker emerge as a prospect, but if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And I think that they're not even going to be watching this fight card. They'll have to get the replays after. So it's just a throwaway fight, and Bresky's fighting for his job. So you'd think he's going to do whatever it takes, whether that's saucing back up, whether that's, trying to really hire the right coaches and that kind of thing. I think we're probably going to see the best UFC effort to date from Bresky. Next up, we've got Trevor Peek taking on Charlie the Cannibal Campbell. And if you guys do not follow me on X, you've got to go do that, because the things I've been posting lately have been funny. I said, laugh at my expense. I had 3 units, $300 on Charlie the Cannibal Campbell against Chris Duncan, guys. If you've ever seen that fight, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Campbell is unable to miss a punch. He's just throwing, landing, big uppercut, big hook, wobbling Chris Duncan. Duncan shooting takedowns, stuffing the takedowns, up to his feet, knocks him backwards, hits him with a big shot, Oh my goodness, he's landed. Charlie Campbell, what a guy. The Cannibal. He's doing everything you ask of him. And then all of a sudden, boing, one big right hand from Chris Duncan shuts his lights off. He sits up on the ground and he gets put down once again. Absolutely brutal stuff. Hats off to Chris Duncan. He got the win there, no doubt about it. But you look at Charlie Campbell, and he definitely looked like the better fighter that night, with all due respect. He just got caught really bad on the chin. He got overconfident. His hands were down. He was fighting wild. He was fighting reckless. He thought he had it all figured out, and the lights got shut off on him really quick. And, man, when I'm looking at this, I'm saying to myself, this is a guy in Trevor Peek who, kind of like Nate Landwehr, is like gonna fight like a dog hard for your money. Like, he's going out there. He wants to win as bad as you want him to win. The thing is, he's very underdeveloped in terms of skill, right? He's out there doing things that they would tell you not to do in a beginner MMA class, right? Like throwing standing hammer fist, just going wild and crazy. But in a lot of ways, that does make him a difficult guy to prepare for. When you're looking at a guy like Trevor Peek, there's not many people in your gym that fight like him. There's not many people in your town that fight like him. I was trying to describe his style to somebody, and his style is basically that of somebody who's fighting life or death on a farm. Like he thinks of everything as like he got to go out there and be wild, be crazy, throw a lot. Both of these guys are young in their careers overall. You look, neither one of them has more than 10 professional fights, but obviously 29 years of age for Peek, 28 years of age for Campbell. A lot of people think Peek is going to get this one done. And, you look at the line, it doesn't reflect that, right? You got Charlie Campbell minus 190. He's a favorite in this spot. But I can just tell you guys, as somebody that bet Charlie Campbell, is he not better at every aspect of MMA than Chris Duncan? Because I think the answer is obviously yes. Is he bigger than him? Yes. And he went out there, landed every shot he wanted to, and then all of a sudden, bing, he gets sparked. So MMA is a crazy sport, right? Nobody is a lock. I can tell you that. Will, with all due respect, Trevor Peek being a lock is something that is insane to say. He does fight wild and crazy. I do believe that, there could be betting value on Trevor Peek, but nobody's a lock in mixed martial arts. And Charlie Campbell, on another night, knocks Chris Duncan out in the first round, and he's a minus 300 favorite coming into this fight. But I think on the other side here, you really don't want to overvalue the Muhammad Yahya win. I think Muhammad Yahya is a guy that is, you know, not UFC level, right? Let's just say it that way. I'm not sure that Muhammad Yahya is UFC level. I think there's a lot more proving that would need to be done to show that. And I think that for the Eric Gonzalez fight, I think that also is similarly true. The Kama Worthy fight is a good win, quality win. The loss to Chepe, I do think is a sign of a little bit being green, right? 13-6 Chepe Mariscal against 8-0 Trevor Peek. So I think that Trevor Peek is 2-1 in the UFC against very low level of competition. And I think that for Charlie Campbell, let's just examine Alex Reyes. He's a guy that was 0-2 in the UFC and hadn't fought since 2017 against Mike Perry. I mean, that was as close to a layup as you can get at the UFC level. No disrespect. And I thought he was going to win that fight. I thought he was going to dominate that fight, and he was able to do so. Against Josh Stroecker in CFFC, he got the win via knockout. And then Chris Duncan, like I said, that was his third most recent fight, and he got brutally knocked out in the first round, and that was in 2022. So he's had a couple of fights since then. He's obviously a quality fighter. He still wants to be in there scrapping, but I think that he does invite some risk. I do think that his finishing instincts are pretty solid, but they could use some improvement. He did lose a decision to Anthony Newton. Anthony Newton went on to never fight again, as best I can understand. That was his only fight as a professional. He got the win via decision and never fought again. So I think that, Charlie is a guy that it's a little hard to evaluate his career. I think he's solid. I think he's talented, but I think he invites some risk. And I think at minus 190, he could look like the value side, or he could look like a bonehead and cost you your money like he did for me. So that's the one thing I would say, just cautioning people. That's the way I feel about it. Next up, guys, we've got Court McGee taking on Alex Morono, and this is a welterweight contest. Let's see here. Man, a lot of confidence on the Alex Morono side, according to our friends over at Tapology. And this is a weird fight, right? You got 39-year-old Court McGee. I mean, that is getting up there for fight years, certainly. He's had a lot of professional bouts as well. And you have Alex Morono on the other side here, 33 years of age. And, this is an interesting one because Court McGee is a guy that is 10-11, right? A negative record right now in the UFC. He's underwater. He got knocked out brutally by Matt Brown after getting knocked out brutally by Jeremiah Wells. But both of those guys are pretty prolific knockout artists. Alex Morono, he is 6-3 career to the knockout. He does have 2 knockouts in the UFC, but he's 2-2 career to the knockout in the UFC. He's certainly not blowing people's hair back in that respect. Court McGee, on the other hand, he's 0-3 career to the knockout within the UFC. He got knocked out by Ponzinibbio, Jeremiah Wells, and Matt Brown in round 1. So those are all much more prolific power punchers as far as I feel. Shout out to Beaver Covington, says, yo, Liam, how the F are you? I had a great betting card on Saturday. Hey, cheers to you, brother. Glad to see it. Shout out to Geo Producing, says, hi, Liam. Much love from the Valley Steam. Kindly thank you. God bless you. God bless you as well, my brother. God bless each and every one of you guys. Thanks for watching. Appreciate you guys being here. But back to this fight that we're talking about, right? We got Court McGee. Let's talk about the good times. He beat Ramiz Brahimaj. He beat Claudio Silva. But neither one of those wins age great. He lost to Carlos Condit, which at the later stages of his career wasn't as great a loss to have, but it was also a sign of Court McGee not having the best fight IQ, right? Like he could have went out there and pursued a lot more takedowns, and he didn't do it. So it was a really bad sign. Against Sean Brady, lost a unanimous decision, and he got dropped badly in that fight as well. So some of the signs of chin regression were there. Lost a split decision against Diego Lima, and Diego Lima, guys, his record in the UFC was just 4-7 when his career ended with the promotion. Pretty unfortunate stuff. I'm just looking at a record for Court McGee that is not very exemplary. His last 3 wins since 2018 are Alex Garcia, Ramiz Brahimaj, and Claudio Silva. Nothing that really jumps off the page at you. Meanwhile, you look at the Alex Morono side, and he did go out there and beat Tim Means. He lost to Joaquin Buckley, who looked very good in his subsequent welterweight bouts. He lost to Santiago Ponzinibbio in a fight that he was winning. That was an unfortunate one for Morono, and another sign that his chin is not always perfect either. Did get knocked out in the first round on one foot by Chaos Williams. Brutal, brutal knockout. Got put in the absolute dirt in that one. And you look at the Reese McGee win, that's not really impressive. Reese McGee has struggled at this level. The Donald Cerrone win, contextually not great, but it was fine. David Zawada gets the win there. Not a great UFC level fighter overall. Mickey Gall, another guy who kind of got cut from the promotion. He's been brought back, but he hasn't seen all the success that they expected from him. Matthew Semmelsberger, guy who's been a little bit struggling in his career lately in the UFC, just 5-5 in the promotion. A lot of his wins coming via early first round knockout. So I think that when you're looking at Alex Morono, he could probably go out there and win this fight. He's 12-6 in the promotion, a lot more impressive record. He's the younger guy as well. But it's just a little bit difficult to see him as such a big favorite, knowing what we know about him getting clipped on the chin. He's not the biggest star, but he did just get his promotion to a third-degree black belt. He's a guy that's been quality on the mat for some time, and he doesn't really spend a lot of time pursuing that in his fights. He is 7-0 career to the submission, but when you look at his UFC run, he's just 2-0 career to the submission. He's kind of gotten away from that until this Tim Means fight where he went out there, got the second round submission via guillotine choke. Tim Means loves getting choked. That is the way that he tends to lose fights. And prior to that, he had not submitted anybody since Josh Berkman back in 2018. That's a long time ago, ladies and gentlemen, since Josh Berkman's name has come up on a live stream. So I think that Alex Morono would be wise to go out there and try and, ply his ground game a little bit. Court McGee is obviously very difficult to put away, but that would be the feather in his cap. The one way that he could get a signature win against a guy like Court McGee would be, the guy who goes out there and gets the first submission win against Court McGee. And I think that Alex is capable of doing that if he's able to hurt him first, if he's able to land some damaging shots on the feet. And I do see that as a possibility. So interesting fight here on paper. I like to see, the UFC kind of giving Court McGee a winnable fight. I don't think he's going to win, but I think it's at least a winnable fight if they're going to book him. I think that's sound, especially coming off a couple brutal knockouts. I think they should give him a guy who's a little bit more of a decision guy, a submission guy, maybe not the heaviest handed guy in the division, but Morono does throw a lot of volume. I think he's going to connect. I think he's eventually going to hurt Court. Yeah, I think that's the way I feel about this one, man. I like Court McGee, but I don't know that I could get there. We'll see how the tape study process shakes out on this fight. Obviously, McGee has found ways to bounce back in the past, but I'm a little bit worried about his chin here coming off of 2 brutal knockouts in a row. All right, guys, next up. For some reason, one of the best fights on the card is being buried on the prelims. We've got Norma Dumont, 6-2, I believe, in the UFC. That is correct. Taking on the returning champion, Germaine de Randamie, 7-2 with the promotion, guys. Very good record for GDR. And her last fight was a win over the, former champion, Juliana Pena. Impressive stuff from GDR in that fight. She went on maternity leave afterwards. And, I've mentioned this fight in the past as one of my favorite examples of the MMA meta changing. When you look at the MMA meta, why are people going for front headlocks? Why are people going for ninja chokes? Why are people going for guillotines all the time? It's because it gets people tired. And if they don't respect it, they go to sleep. It doesn't matter if they're a better grappler. It doesn't matter if they're a better wrestler. They know the position's a little bit better than you. If you can lock their head in that vice grip, it's all over. And when you look at Germaine de Randamie, she got Juliana Pena a little bit fatigued, started landing those knees to the body, started landing some shots. And then when Juliana Pena was getting tired from pursuing her own wrestling, her own grappling, and taking these shots to the body, she locked that ninja choke in. It wasn't even proper finishing mechanics on the lower legs, right? She was like just holding on to one leg with a little half guard. She was able to get the finish there. Bang. Perfect showing of the difference between being better at jiu-jitsu and being better at grappling in mixed martial arts on the night. And the better grappler that night for mixed martial arts purposes was Germaine de Randamie. And now she's back after a lengthy layoff. I believe she's become a mother in the interim as well. She's been a police officer in the past. She's done a lot of other things outside of fighting, but she has knockout power in women's MMA, and she's a former UFC champion, and she has submission equity based on what we've seen from her in her last fight. I mean, there's just a lot of things that tell me Germaine de Randamie could come back and be an X factor in this fight. She's got a quality opponent here, no doubt, in Norma Dumont, but Norma Dumont is a woman that fought at 140-pound catchweights, 145 pounds. She's got to come down to 135 for this one. And Chelsea Chandler missed weight when she came down. These women fought recently. So I think that this is a spot where, man, it's going to be, tough for Norma Dumont to make this weight feel good. I think if she's able to do it, hell, hats off to her. It's going to be a great fight then. But I think that if she struggles at all with that, Germaine de Randamie could give her some problems. I do think she's a very quality fighter based on everything we've seen from Germaine de Randamie. I mean, let's just talk about the losses, right? Germaine de Randamie lost to Amanda Nunes in one of the more competitive decisions of Amanda Nunes' title run. Let's be fair about that. Prior to that, she got finished by Amanda Nunes back in 2013. So she fought Amanda Nunes twice. You saw the substantial improvements she had made fight over fight. She beat Larissa Pacheco, quality opponent. She beat Holly Holm, quality opponent, close fight. She beat Raquel Pennington, current champion. She beat Aspen Ladd, knockout first round. I mean, Germaine de Randamie, for all intents and purposes, is as quality as a women's MMA fighter gets. Yeah, I just think that this is an interesting spot. And, I think she could potentially cause some problems here for Norma Dumont. So an interesting matchup. I'm going to have to tape it a little bit more in depth. I mean, Norma Dumont, I remember her getting barnstormed a little bit, by Megan Anderson, right? Knocked out in the first round. That was a early showing in the UFC. She missed weight at bantamweight against Ashley Evans Smith. Ironically, she was scheduled to take on Erin Blanchfield. That's insane. Wow. And then Macy Chiasson. I mean, the size difference between those two women is absolutely enormous. And then Macy Chiasson, she lost a split decision to her. So another big, tall, long girl was able to give her some problems in the past. If we look at the intangibles, the size up on this fight, 5.5-inch reach advantage for the Iron Lady, Germaine de Randamie, as well as a 2-inch advantage in height. Interesting fight in every sense of the word. And I think we could see a new title challenger emerge from this fight. So again, why is the UFC burying it on the prelims? God only knows. I do not know. Next up, we've got a fight where I'm biased as shit. So let's just call that out right off the rip, guys. Biased as shit for my guy, Victor Hugo, Victor Striker. This is a guy that we're going to take a nice cheers and sip of the coffee to. After we called Victor to get the win on the Contender Series, my man came back and he said, yo, you got the picks right. Great job, gentlemen. He shouted out the panel. So we appreciate a guy who, instead of coming back and if you ever get it wrong on their fight, they're bitter, they're sore, they come back and they let you know, hey, fuck you, you suck. I really appreciate the guys that go back and look for the analysts that called them out and said, hey, I think this guy can win and here's why. And Chad and Hellinger, one of my all-time favorite fighters for that reason. The guy is just really down-to-earth, cool guy, and came back and said, hey, great bets. Well done. Good analysis. And Victor Hugo, Victor Striker, same way, man. I think people gave him grief because he missed weight in his last fight. I don't think they understood. They were asking him to make an insanely fast turnaround. He tried to step up on short notice and be a bro. He's like, yeah, I'll do it. I'll find a way. He couldn't find a way. All right. It was insane. He's a huge guy. I didn't think it made any sense from the beginning. Shout out to our guy, Lucrative MMA, in the chat. Says, let's go, mate. Good luck to you and all this weekend. Appreciate you, my brother. Shout out to Cole Stein. Says, love the first look. Excited for the next couple weeks. Absolutely. We're going to go heavy for UFC 300 in terms of the content, in terms of the great guests that we're going to have on the show, all that and more. Can't wait to bring you guys what we've got planned for you. But in any case, we're back to this one, and we've got my guy, Victor Hugo. And Victor Hugo, Victor Striker, however you want to call it. Why do I like this guy so much? Man, he's a finisher. 8 wins by knockout, 9 wins by submission, 7 wins by decision. Ton of experience under his belt. I noted when this guy came to the Contender Series, one of the most experienced guys on the season of Contender Series that we watched. Certainly one of the most experienced guys, on that particular card, right? Like if you just looked at that episode, it was like, 7-0, 10-0, 10-1, whatever. I'm just calling this off the top of my head, but that's how Contender Series normally goes. Then you look at a guy like Victor Hugo, 24-4. That record stands out on paper, man. That's a lot of wins. That's a lot of fights too. And then you look at this guy, Alatengheili. He's an enemy of the state. Why do I say that? Because he beat my boy Chattanhellinger, who I just told you is one of my favorite fighters. I'm kidding, of course. Alatengheili, very sound fighter in his own right. Fights out of a great gym. Seems like a good guy by all accounts. 4-2-1. In the UFC. So he's done a good job in the UFC, right? That's a winning record. He beat Kevin Kroom, knocked him out in the first round, went to a draw with Gustavo Lopez. That's a little bit alarming. Chattanhellinger, win by unanimous decision. Thought that was a clean win. If you guys look, Chattanhellinger broke his nose in the first round of that fight, and he was kind of just trying to make it to the end of that fight, rally, not get finished, look to make his way back into it in rounds 2 and 3. And he kind of just got shut out of that because he was dealing with adversity. He broke his nose. He was trying to, find a way to manage it and win the fight. And that's very difficult to do when your body's failing you. But then you look, the Casey Kenny loss was one-sided, guys. It was absolutely brutal. He got beat up in that fight, had really bad welts on his body. If my memory serves, he was getting body kicked all night. You could see like the foot outline. And then, when he fought quality fighters outside the UFC, he got knocked out in the first round by Kai Asakura back in 2017. He does have a few losses in the first round on his record. Did fight Song Yadong way back in the day, 2013, on his record and go to decision. So Alatengheili been doing the damn thing for a long time. Quality fighter, beat Dana Batgari, close fight, close decision in that fight. Beat Ryan Benoit, a guy who has struggled in his recent run in the promotion. And then the Chris Gutierrez loss is forgivable, right? Chris is a very good fighter up at the top of his game. So now Victor Hugo is kind of getting thrown right into the deep end, right? A quality opponent. He's got across from him here. But I think that Victor has a little bit more momentum on his side. 13-fight win streak for Victor Hugo in this fight. And when you look at that fight he was having on Contender Series, I thought that he was better in every area. I thought that he was going to be the better striker as well as the better grappler there and kind of pick the way that he wanted to win. That knee bar, guys, is a sensational finish. In my view, I don't think a lot of fighters are adept in some of those positions, but he has wins via heel hook and knee bar in his 2 most recent fights. And he also has 8 wins via knockout in his career. So I think that this is a fight where, I'm biased as all hell, but I think Victor Hugo could make a statement and come out here and really surprise people with a dominant knockout win in this fight. So that's what I'm going to take. I'm going to take Victor Hugo by knockout, and I'm going to do a lot more tape and due diligence and come back with a more informed opinion later on in the fight. Thomas Bato asks, or Tomas, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, brother. You can let me know with the phonetics if you'd like, but can Victor look good if he doesn't get the finish? I think the answer to that is yes. I do think he's a killer be killed kind of fighter, so he could get a little bit flat by round 3. I think that sometimes he's like willing to pursue his submissions, maybe to a detriment. Maybe he could end up in the bottom position. Alatengheili is a wrestler, but I just overall feel that if you look at Victor's quality of work, I think he's a little bit better than Alatengheili, despite not having a chance to prove it yet at the UFC level. So that's how I feel about this one, but I could be wrong, man. No doubt about it. He is facing 8-5 indecisions, Alatengheili. Victor Hugo, friend of the program, I'm kidding, is 7-1 to the decision career. So he's actually had a much better record in decisions than his opponent here, but he hasn't fought the same quality of opponents. Hunter, I'm saying the same thing. Hugo is not as proven against quality opposition, but I'm an analyst, so I'm trying to make a claim based on what I've watched, and what I've watched is a guy that I think is very quality at fighting. He fights in an interesting way, but he's constantly pursuing the finish, and I think he's really dangerous. So I don't think Alatengheili is as dangerous in terms of his finishing upside, and I think that's been borne out over the course of his UFC run. Obviously fighting quality opposition, but just one win by knockout, and that was against Kevin Kroom when he cut a ton of weight in advance of that fight and looked like a skeleton on the scales. So yeah. I think Thomas made a good point. Thanks, man. Hailey is a bit one-dimensional. I think he's a classic wrestle boxer, if I had to describe his style. I think he's more of a decision point fighter than anything else, and he does have some power in his hands, but I don't think it's anything it's blowing your hair back. So as far as I'm concerned, Victor Hugo, dangerous in all positions. And I think that he's going to get the win. All right, guys, next up, who do we got? We've got Cynthia Calvillo and Piera Rodriguez. I'll just be frank, guys. This is a fight I will not spend as much time discussing. Cynthia Calvillo, 9-6-1, but she's on a terrible run in 5 losses in a row. That's really bad look. You are almost certain to see her cut if she loses this fight. Now, on the other side of things, Piera Rodriguez is a woman that is coming off a loss. She got submitted by Jillian Robertson. I don't think there's a ton of shame in that. Jillian Robertson's a quality fighter. I think the more shame is from the decision over Kay Hansen. I thought that was a fight she could have went out there and finished. Valeska Machado, I think that's a quality enough win on the Contender Series. Sam Hughes, I think that's a quality enough win in the UFC. Obviously Sam Hughes isn't going to be fighting for a title anytime soon, but she is a tough girl to go out there and, finish, right? We saw that against Jacqueline Amorim. She will lie, cheat, and steal, do whatever it takes to continue fighting. And when I'm looking at this matchup, obviously Cynthia's fought the better quality of competition. You look at her recent fight, she lost to Lupe Godinez, split decision there. Could have went either way, but I did think Lupe had probably done enough on the night. I think I bet Cynthia as well. She lost to Nina Nunes, which, that was a tough fight for her. Wasn't able to get much offense going in the takedown department. And I think that's been a problem for her lately, has kind of been getting away from her wrestling. She lost to Jessica Andrade. That was a horrible look. The Andrea Lee fight, she quit on the stool again, and not very good look. And then Caitlin Chukagian, a very high quality fighter in the division. Man, her last win was over Jessica Ai. I don't believe she's longer with the promotion. She did go to a draw with Marina Rodriguez. And I do think that's an impressive fight for her. She got a 10-8 round from the top position. It's the thing that always gives people hope on the Calvillo side. Like my guy Furio Betts, he says it's Calvillo season. Maybe it is. But I'm certainly not feeling so bullish on her because we've seen, mixed results. And especially lately, haven't seen all the fire that I've needed to see from Cynthia Calvillo. But the one thing I'll mention is with the exit of USADA, I always wonder if somebody's going to look like a completely different fighter and version of themselves this time around. And, she is training local. She's in Vegas. She's putting in the work out there. And I'm sure she's going to have a pretty vocal contingency in the room. I don't think that Piera Rodriguez is moving units. I don't think that the UFC cares to see her, succeed or fail. I think they're pretty indifferent to her career. And the more experienced girl here is definitely Cynthia Calvillo at a pretty high level. I want to make sure that I'm getting a motivated version of her if I'm going to part ways with my coins. And on the Piera Rodriguez side, she is much younger here, 31 years of age compared to 36 for Cynthia. But I think women tend to age a little bit more gracefully in WMMA. So something to note here. Shout out to my guy, Tone. Megan's in the comments as well. Appreciate you being here. And I think that there could be some upside, definitely, to the Cynthia Calvillo plus money. But I just haven't been seeing as much effort and intensity as I want to see lately. Shout out to Devin Davis, says leave a like for Liam. I'd really appreciate it. If you guys don't mind, go ahead and drop a like. Go ahead and get subscribed if you're new here. If you're watching on Twitter, no problem, but go ahead and come on over to the YouTube channel as well. Drop a subscribe, hit that notification bell so that way you know when we're going live, because there's a little bit of ambiguity each week, but I try and get you guys the program as early as I possibly can, but I don't want to come to you before I do some preliminary research so we have something to talk about. But on this fight, I think that this is a interesting matchup. I think that we're going to find out if Cynthia Calvillo is coming or going. And I could guarantee if she loses this fight, it's almost certain that she's going to be cut because it's 6 losses in a row at that point. It's very hard to justify keeping her on the roster. And on the other side here for Piera Rodriguez, she's kind of got to get moving, 31 years of age. Her skills looked a little bit audited in her last fight with Jillian Robertson. Her cardio has struggled a little bit down the stretch in these 3-round fights as well. So I think that the better quality of competition has been on the Calvillo side. And I think that in this fight, I got to just confirm this. Is this fight at strawweight? Yeah. So I think Calvillo has got to be somewhat motivated to come back down to 115 pounds where she's been much more successful as opposed to 125 where she's really been struggling lately. I think this could be an interesting fight. So I'm going to have to do a social media stalk here. Shout out to my guy, from YBB, Your Best Bet. Great people over there. Make sure you support the work that they're doing. Shout out. Next up, though, we're moving to a hopefully more fruitful fight on the card. Gene Matsumoto taking on Dan Argueta. And I just must confess to you guys, I cannot remember Gene Matsumoto very well. You know, I know that he fought Casey Tanner and got the win. I'm looking at his record. I don't know who I picked for that fight. Let me see if I can find that real quick. So I actually picked Matsumoto via split decision on the Contender Series. He ended up going out there and getting the unanimous decision win. I wasn't blown away by him coming into the fight. I wasn't blown away by Tanner either, and that's why I thought that he was going to end up getting the win. For Dan Argueta, I think that I may have overvalued some of his recent performances because that loss to Miles Johns I just didn't see coming. But I've also historically underrated Miles Johns slightly, and we saw that again in his most recent fight. I thought Cody Gibson could get the win there, and he was not able to do so. So you look at Ronnie Lawrence. You know, that was a fight that was gutting for me, guys. I bet plus 170, Dan Argueta. It was the only tracked bet I had on the whole card. Dan Argueta on the money line, plus 170. And of course, no contest, void. It was like I shouldn't have even done any work that whole week, you know, waste of time. But in any case, what I did take away from that is that Dan Argueta can be dangerous in the early going, man. He can go out there and get that first round finish. We saw it early in his career against lower level opponents. He was going out there blowing through them, first round submission, first round finish. Myron Santos, pretty talented fighter as well. He was able to go out there and TKO him in the third round. So we were seeing not just wins, but finishes from Dan Argueta. And then he got to the UFC and he takes on Nick Aguirre. He gets the decision win there, but he wasn't blowing anybody's hair back. And the Ronnie Lawrence fight, he came out much more aggressive. And then he kind of regressed in that Miles Johns fight. So now he's 1-1 in the UFC, 2 no contests as well. He lost to Ricky Tercios on The Ultimate Fighter, but that was another close fight. It was right within the balance. Ricky Tercios is a guy who is, you know, vaguely UFC level. And Matsumoto on the other side here is an undefeated fighter, but we haven't really seen him take on the highest level of opposition. He's been fighting on the LFA regional scene, doing a good job there in the brief stint that he had there. But I'm not seeing any names that I recognize personally. So I'll have to ask some people with sharp opinions from the regional scene, you know, that I am in contact with, what their opinion is. I'll have to go back and watch the footage myself. But I'm also noticing his loss in 2017 on the amateurs was a first round rear naked choke submission. And I do think that we could see, you know, a similar fate here if Dan Argueta is able to get after him while he's fresh. He has good wrestling. He has dangerous submissions. And I think he could go out there and potentially, you know, get the win. So I'm just not going to count out the determined Dan Argueta. I think he's a tough guy. I think he brings the heat. I think he's hard to put away. And I think that on the other side here, we've got Matsumoto, who needs a little bit of testing. And I think that that's what Dan's going to provide. So if Matsumoto is the real deal, then he's going to go out here and get the win. But to see a guy flip favorite in his UFC debut against a tough opponent who's going to try and ground him and going to try and push the pace, a lot of the things that people expected from Casey Tanner last time out, you know, I think Furio makes a great point. Matsumoto can be taken down. I agree with that. So, yeah, man, this is a really interesting spot. And I think that Matsumoto could get his first loss here against Dan Argueta. I think it's going to be a tough fight for him. But I will just say he would have fit a system for me, you know, which is the younger fighter with more professional experience. If he had remained the underdog, he is instead now flipped to the favorite. So, yeah, he's definitely not going to fit the system based on those changes over time in the market. We can move along to the next fight here, guys, where we've got 2 fights left on this card. Dylan Mindless Hulk Budka is taking on Cesar Almeida. And I got to say, Dylan Budka out of Ohio. So he's got a small place in my heart right there. We'll take a sip of the coffee for Dylan Budka in the great state of Ohio. However, I wasn't blown away by Dylan Budka in the lead up to the Contender Series either. Let me see if I had some fight tape on him. So all of this is available on Patreon as well, the documents that I'm pulling up and referring to. The only fight that I have taped from him was for this Hanekom fight. I had written down some notes, and he was a Division II wrestler at Urbana University. This is directly from my notes. He was a high school All-American and national champion. Hanekom looked solid to me on the record. So Budka going out there and getting that win is obviously a quality win, but he had to go out there and earn it via unanimous decision. Wasn't able to get the finish there. And maybe in past seasons of the Contender Series, he would not have gotten signed as a result. Same thing with Cesar Almeida, right? He went out there and got the win over Lucas Fernando. I actually called him to do so. I believe he was a plus 200 underdog in that spot. And I liked Cesar Almeida because he has a lot of really high-level experience overall. He trains at Extreme Couture. He was being cornered by the likes of Kelvin Gastelum, Eddie Cha, Santino DeFranco. So he's had quality instruction throughout his career. He also was a Glory kickboxing guy. He beat Alex Pereira, the current champion, in kickboxing. That is like his big claim to fame. I think Alex's 2-1 career against him in the series. But either way, I mean, anybody who's got a win over Alex Pereira in kickboxing or otherwise has my respect for life, because that guy is dangerous and extremely scary. When you look at the Budka side of the equation, he has been submitted before in his first professional bout. He has had some amateur fights as well, lost a couple decisions on the amateur circuit, but overall he had good results throughout, got a bunch of wins, a bunch of finishes. When I'm looking at his professional record, there hasn't been a ton of standout wins for me. The Chad Hanekom win, I think, is his best win to date. That was on the Contender Series. And he lost a split decision that probably could have went either way to Azamat Bakoev. 17-3 is his opponent there. So, man, I think that you look at the styles make fights angle, and you'd think that Dylan Budka would be a really tough style matchup for Cesar Almeida, because he's a wrestler and he could potentially go out there and take him to the ground. He's got a big social media following. I think Budka seems like a likable guy. But I think Cesar Almeida is also really, really dangerous. He didn't show that as much on the Contender Series. But his most recent loss in kickboxing was to the number one kickboxer in the world in the weight class via what I thought was a very close decision. He fought him twice. First time was a majority decision. Second time was a unanimous decision loss. But in both cases, I thought he looked somewhat impressive. And his MMA career has been start-stop. He beat Thiago Araju back in 2016 as a pro. Then he went back to kickboxing. He beat Vitor Costa. He beat Danilo Souza. None of these guys are worth their salt. But Lucas Fernando is 9-3 as a professional. Kind of, struggled after that fight with Cesar Almeida. He lost to Azamat Bakoev, same guy that beat Dylan Budka by split decision, right? And so I think that I'm looking at a guy in Lucas Almeida, in Cesar Almeida, who has dangerous kickboxing. He's very, lethal with his strikes at times. He knows how to win rounds and minutes. It seems like a tough fight for Budka in some ways, but if you're looking at the line movement, it feels otherwise, right? He opens plus 145. And the line has flipped completely, right? He's minus 155 now on Bet Online. And Cesar Almeida opens minus 170. He's now plus 135 as an underdog. So for me, I just think that Almeida showed me a lot in his kickboxing career that told me he knows how to move, grapple, standing. I don't think he's easy to just bully around in the standing positions, but I've got to rewatch the Contender Series fight and see the grappling exchanges he's had to see if there's any improvement. And I think that my guy, Mason, Narrative Nation, says he's making his debut a week before Poetan fights and he's beaten him before. I think that's very interesting. I think that when I'm looking at a guy like Budka, he's making a debut here against another tough guy making a debut. But I just think the guy who's had more experience in big fights is Cesar Almeida. And I think that he's training with the right guys. I think he's training with the right team. They tried to match him up with Christian Leroy Duncan, and he had a infection from a surgery. So I got to look into that a little bit deeper. But then they tried to match him up with Josh Fremd, a guy I think that he could have beaten. So I think they're trying to, get him a winnable fight for his first UFC fight. But now it's going to be, a style clash. Both of these guys have a path to victory. But for me, I just trust a little bit more the plus money upside on Cesar Almeida. Last time out, he was a dog. Nobody believed in him. He went out there and got the win, vindicated me. And I think he could do the same this weekend. I don't think every person that translates over from kickboxing has the style or the ability to succeed. And maybe that's the case for Almeida. But what I have seen from him gives me some hope that he can do that. And his performances against Pereira, there's some angling in the clinch, there's some holding, there's some moving. You see that this guy's not completely inept in the wrestling and grappling. And I think he always had some designs on MMA. So it should be a fun fight. And it's hard for me to pick against an Ohio wrestler. But I think Cesar Almeida is a tough opponent. And I think he might do more damage over the course of 15 minutes. So it should be a great scrap. But give me Cesar Almeida, if ever so slightly, now that he's flipped to the underdog odds. And last but not least, guys, we've got a women's bout with Nora Cornole, and she took on Jocelyn Edwards, got the unanimous decision win. Very controversial decision, if my memory serves. Jocelyn Edwards, MMA decisions. Let's see if this was controversial. I have a feeling it was. Nora Cornole. So let's see. Yeah, half the media scorecards scored it for Edwards. Two judges gave it 30-27 Cornole. Clemens Werner scored one round, the second round, for Jocelyn Edwards. So a lot of media members disagreed with the cage side judges for this one. I think Cornole was a big crowd favorite in that fight. I don't think the crowd is going to particularly care about this fight if there's any crowd assembled at all. We're in the Apex Center, and this is a women's fight very early on the card. But I look at this as an opportunity for both ladies. Nora Cornole is, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm not trying to butcher her name. She's 34 years of age, but she's a violent woman. She could bust up people's faces, cut them a little bit. She's had some success in her bouts. When you look, her last loss was her first fight. She lost to Jacqueline Cavalcanti, who's 6-1 as a professional, and just got a win over Zara Farron in her UFC debut. So shout out to her. She's only lost to one other UFC level fighter. She has gone out there and finished the vast majority of her opponents prior to the UFC. Like I said, violent woman, wins via TKO, busting up some people's faces. And on the other side, no mess Mullen's here, 6-0 as a professional, 1-0 in the UFC, beat Irina Alekseeva. And that fight was a little bit less convincing than I kind of expected we would get. I thought we would get a finish on either side in that fight. And Russian Ronda was able to stick it out to the end, go to a decision there. But she had gotten a weird win over Stephanie Egger the fight prior. You look at Melissa Mullins. She has lost several decisions on the amateur scene. Since going pro, she has a win over Daria Zelenikova, who we saw make her debut last week, and fight, Montserrat, half underwater Rendon. I mean, she literally looked like she was moving her punches a little bit underwater, but no disrespect there. She was fighting hard, valiantly as well. But when we're looking at Reden Zuak, 6-4, Mafalda Carmona, it doesn't look like Melissa Mullins has really fought a very quality level of competition until her two most recent fights. So that could be an interesting culture shock here, where she's taking on, a girl that obviously had a close decision with Jocelyn Edwards, but Jocelyn Edwards is a woman who is 4-3 in the UFC, right? Got a winning record. And one of her losses is to this woman, Nora Cornole. Nora Cornole also has a pretty big social media following. If you look, I'm not normally a person that calls foul on early stoppages, but I do think that there was a different, certainly a much more protective standard of the fighter applied to Daria Zelenikova than against most men's fighters. Like, they'll let men just get beaten up most of the time. And Daria Zelenikova was taking a couple shots, but she looked like she was moving, intelligently defending to me pretty clearly, and they stopped the fight. So I thought that was a little bit early, a little bit egregious. And then against Arena Alexieva, who's like barely a UFC level fighter in my view, who has some upside. She's big, she's strong. She landed some shots, right? Daria Zelennikova was landing some shots when that fight was on the feet. Looked good with her striking, landing big, clean strikes. So I think that for Nora Cornole, this fight is about staying upright, staying on the feet, landing big shots. And I think on the other side, if you're Melissa Mullins, you want to get this fight to the ground, get it to the ground, and get it to the ground more, because I think she's very good at looking for the ground and pound finishes. But I just think if this fight plays out on the feet, it's going to be really close or a loss for Mullins. So I think Mullins is kind of takedown reliant in this fight. And I think if she's got good cornering and good coaching, that's what she's going to look for here. So I'm going to listen to the interviews as well, see what she's expecting to do. But for me, I just couldn't imagine laying, minus 350 in a women's MMA prelim opener. I mean, that seems a little bit aggressive to me. But I understand that I haven't done as much research on this fight as the people that are probably betting it. So I'll do some more research now and familiarize myself. But shout out to the Parlay MMA. Says Nora is a 5-time French national Muay Thai champ. I more than expect her to hold her own on the feet as well, brother. I think that's a great point. And I think people are maybe just looking at the younger fighter in Dixon, who's undefeated. But I just think when you contextualize it, there's not that much that separates these two women, except public perception. And so for me, I'll probably be on the Cornole side or passing if I had to imagine, but probably just lay off this fight altogether. It's probably a wise decision. So there you have it, guys. That's our first look at the card for UFC Vegas 90. What I want you to do is go ahead and drop a like on this video if you'd enjoyed it. If you want to help out the show, go ahead and subscribe on podcast platforms. Going to release the show on podcast as well. If you guys would want to make sure you never miss a live stream as they're getting started, go ahead and hit the bell. That will give you notifications. Hey, Liam Picks Fights is about to go live, because Bets and Banter is later in the week. We're coming back to you. Myself, Rich is going to be in the building as well. Might have some other content in store for you guys this week, but what I do know is we're going to be coming at you hard with some great content for UFC 300, a really great fight card, a fight card that is worthy of our attention. It's worthy of our breakdowns. I might do an individual breakdown for every single fight on the card. It is that good of a show. So I think that we've got a lot of great things to discuss. We've got a lot of great content coming your way in the future. So I want to say thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. If you guys haven't done it already, check out Fight Numbers. Changing the game is my man, John Kelly, out there putting together a prop finder, out there putting together a real odds board for MMA that actually can help you find the lines that you're looking for at the time that you need them. It's been very helpful for me since he's introduced a lot of these new features. So shout out to the guys over at Fight Numbers. John Kelly is a guy that I put my full heart and support, trust behind because he's been in the space, public guy for a long time, puts his ass in the jackpot every week with the content, with the results, always third-party tracked. So I really respect what John's doing, and I think this is a great product. If you agree, after checking it out yourself, go ahead and use my promo code Liam. That's 50% off, however you want to sign up. So I appreciate the support from Fight Numbers. I appreciate the support from each and every one of you guys. God bless you all. Enjoy those fights. And until next time, come back and we're having all the same fun again on Thursday, 3 p.m. in the East. You don't want to miss it. Bets and Banter, baby. We're back. Thanks, guys.